Hi, I'm Ben Smithers, and with my studio partner Luz Wallace, we'll be talking about Ferda Colatan's studio, Scarred Earth, Architecture in the Age of the Great Acceleration. The studio critically examines the concept of nature in the Age of the Great Acceleration as it relates to architecture. This presentation will outline the studio's approach and also place particular focus on the types of representation through which we've been making these explorations. First, to acquaint us with the concept of the Great Acceleration. This is the idea that after the Second World War, man's impact on the planet increased in its extent, its magnitude, and also its reach. It's no longer today credible to say that there's any part of the globe that man has not altered in some significant way. His film highlights humankind's discomfort with its continuation of the Enlightenment paradigm of nature as a resource. We also considered real-world examples that demonstrate the breaking down of the Renaissance idea that nature is an untouched wonder to be preserved in its pristine state. This is Mount Ikeno in Japan, and on the outside it looks like a natural mountain, but Gursky then edits his representation to illustrate the strangeness of the place and the experience of being there without going so far as to take it beyond the realms of the plausible. And so to the work of our studio. We're using a site in China, a former mining province called Shandong. Little, if anything, of this site remains untouched by man, scarred as it is by the previous mining activity. For example, if you look at the topography, it's not only conditioned by the mountain, but also by the mining. Nevertheless, this does represent a new kind of nature, one that's edited and altered by humankind, but nevertheless evocative of the earlier ideas about what nature could be. It's therefore rich in qualities that allow us to explore how architecture can stimulate a new human desire to acknowledge and participate in this new nature. We also explore how agency can no longer be understood as an exclusively human prerogative, with nature purely as the subject of Enlightenment or Renaissance thinking. Some teams also found mining conditions that exist elsewhere, real conditions that could plausibly be found on our site, and hybridized those conditions to produce their own site. This concept of hybridization is one which is key to the work of the studio, and this hybridization is clear in these two images, which photomontage plan views of the site with the team's interventions. They show how each team is exploring the qualities of what is already there and the new relationships that can be formed with the new intervention. There is already an architecture in the site, aesthetic qualities that exist and can be brought out and exploited by these projects. Several projects began by using a plan view site collage to explore these qualities, and Luz will now talk about how we've used different forms of representation to explore the polemic of the studio.
Some used collage to explore how the aesthetic of the projects could be generated from a new relationship between existing site conditions and new interventions. Here we see two examples. One, a collage of the chunk model, and another, a section collage that formed a part of early project development. While others focused more on collages of perspective views taken directly from the site, in some cases hybridizing other site photographs or other existing found conditions. Some teams sought to find other ways to explore the aesthetic of this new nature, to use as inspiration as well as a way to communicate the project's intentions. One team edited a passage from Goethe's novel Faust, adapting it to the age of the Great Acceleration. Another is basing their project on the idea of a travel company enticing tourists to a strange place. Teams also focused on developing the relationship between existing site and their intervention by working in plan view representations of their chunk models. This continued in the chunk models. For most teams, representations of the chunk have become the primary developmental tool. Through the chunk, teams made use of existing architectural qualities found on the site, also exploring the full extent of the project itself, underground and overground, in some cases through the introduction of machinic systems which is associated with the intervention. For example, introducing a machinic element to hybridize the found with the made, and so exploring what this new interpretation of nature could be. Each project has done that in a different way. For example, some chunks take more of the top of the site and others dig underground to reveal machinic aesthetics. Another example here, they have developed the section of the chunk as a way to span the surface and the underground, which on a mining site offers as much rich potential as the surface itself. Several teams found strange qualities in existing underground spaces and sought to emphasize and develop these through underground perspective renderings. A key part of the studio is to critique how architecture might help humankind to develop a relationship for this new kind of nature. Some projects have aimed to create a sense of estrangement as a way to engage both the topic of the studio, a new aesthetic for nature, and disturbing humankind's long-standing assumption of nature as the object.